Hi everyone. This lecture is going to be kind of short. This video or voiceover lecture is going to be kind of short. It's just going to be a quick introduction to the robust australopiths. So the last lecture had some information about the gracile australopiths. This is basically a separate category of members of the same genus, the Australopithecus genus. The robusts have some different anatomy and some different adaptations, so we'll talk a little bit about what makes a robust Australopith robust. So generally the robust Australopiths are later than the graciles, a little bit later in time. They have a more specialized set of adaptations, especially related to mastication. So the term mastication is a reference to the chewing apparatus. So things like the teeth, all of the anatomy of the face that's related to chewing. We see less dramatic differences postcranially. The term postcranial just means everything below the skull. So everything, all the other parts of the body from the neck down are very, very similar between the robusts and the graciles. So the differences that we see between the two are really just limited to what we see with cranial anatomy. Okay, so we have some general trends for the robust australopiths. We have a decrease in anterior tooth size, or at least a stasis. That term stasis just means it stays the same. So generally across the board, we see a decrease in anterior tooth size. The front teeth, those teeth that you see when you smile, the incisors are shrinking over time. The second item, the increase in posterior tooth size and an increase in enamel thickness. The posterior teeth are the back teeth. So the back teeth that are basically where your cheeks are. We're talking about the molars and the premolars here. They are larger in size and they have much thicker enamel. So the teeth overall are larger and they have thicker enamel. And we also have a slight increase in cranial capacity, nothing super impressive, but we do have some increases across the board in brain size. Okay, so what specific features are we looking at that are different between the robusts and the graciles? So first off, the facial features that are listed here, the flared zygomatics and the dish face. The flared zygomatics, if you look at where I'm pointing the cursor here, the zygomatics form part of the cheekbone. The outer portion of your cheekbone, that is the zygomatic, those are a paired bone here, those are the zygomatic bones. They are wider and they're more flaring in robust australopiths. So what that does is it creates this very, very wide round face. So the dish face here is created by having these very wide flaring zygomatics. So the picture that we're looking at here on the left-hand side is from the bottom up. So this is the upper tooth row here. These are the zygomatics here. So this is just a different view of the same fossil. We can see that these cheeks are very wide right here, and it forms this dish face, having a really wide aspect to the face. Okay, we also have some cranial features, including something called a sagittal crest. A sagittal crest, the easiest way to think about a sagittal crest is that it's basically a mohawk made out of bone. It's this ridge of bone that runs down the center of the skull. We'll look at some pictures in a second that will show exactly what I'm talking about here, but if we go back one on the slide set here, you can see this guy here has a little bit of a sagittal crest here, so this little ridge that runs down the center of the skull. Okay, so they have a sagittal crest, they have a larger cranial capacity. Again, we're not talking about a huge brain size increase, we're talking about relatively small in the scheme of things, but it is a little bit bigger. And we have something called postorbital constriction. So the term postorbital means behind the eyes. The term orbital is a reference to the eye socket. So postorbital constriction means that the area directly behind the eye socket is pinched. So this picture that we're looking at here that I'm indicating with the cursor here, Just to orient you, this is the brain case up at the top of the picture. Down at the bottom is the face. So we're looking from the top down. We're looking at the top of the skull from the top down. So this is the side with the face. So the eye orbits are going to be on this side. And if we look just behind the eye orbits, we have this pinched skull here. So this whole area here is pinched and constricted, and that's what we're talking about when we say post-orbital constriction. The area of the cranium right behind the eyeballs is pinched up. Okay, so what do all of these characteristics mean? We don't just have random changes of this scale for no reason. So there has to be something going on from an anatomical standpoint that leads to having these kind of changes to the skull. So if we look at this slide here, what you're looking at here is a diagram of what the musculature of one of these animals looks like. So we have the chewing muscles especially being highlighted here. The darker red on the top of the diagram here, that is something called the temporalis muscle. We all have a temporalis muscle. It provides most of the power behind the chewing motion when you're eating. That temporalis muscle is providing a lot of the power for that motion. So the temporalis muscle attaches along the inside of your jaw. It stretches up along the side of the head, and in a human, it inserts onto the side of the head. So if you were to touch your skull on the outside right above your ear when you're chewing, you can feel that muscle flexing underneath the skin. So that's the temporalis muscle. Again, really important muscle for chewing. The other muscle here that's on the diagram, this lighter pink one, is something called the masseter muscle. It also provides a lot of power behind chewing as well. So it attaches along the outside of the jaw and up to this kind of ridge here that forms part of your cheekbone. So those two muscles work together when you're chewing to provide the power necessary to crush up food. On a robust australopith, these muscles are very, very large. So they're much larger than they are in the graciles, and they're much larger than they are in modern humans. So basically all of this anatomy is related to having larger chewing muscles. So you can see here this temporalis muscle stretches along the side of the skull, and it goes under this structure. So this structure is something called a zygomatic arch. You can feel it on the side of your face. It kind of stretches backwards towards your ear from your cheekbone. There's a ridge of bone you can feel on your own face. That's your zygomatic arch. That chewing muscle passes underneath the arch. So if we go back over to this slide here, and we look back at some of this anatomy, we can see this postorbital constriction right here. It pinches up the skull. We have the wide zygomatic bones right here. So the combination of having the postorbital constriction and having the wide zygomatic bones basically leaves a big empty space right here, which I'm indicating with the cursor. Having that big open empty space means that there's a large space to accommodate a large chewing muscle. So that empty space there in a living animal is where the chewing muscle is passing through before it comes and attaches to the top of the skull. So having that postorbital constriction and having the flared zygomatics and dish face creates this nice big empty space to accommodate a big powerful chewing muscle. Now that temporalis muscle, if we go back to this slide, you can see on this robust australopith that's being pictured here, this temporalis muscle stretches all the way up to the top of the skull. Now on a human, it just inserts on the side of the skull. We have pretty small, pretty puny chewing muscles. It just attaches to the side of the skull. In one of these robust australopiths that have such powerful chewing muscles, powerful large-sized chewing muscles, basically what is required from an anatomical perspective in that case is to have a large muscle attachment point. So the larger a muscle, the larger the insertion point needs to be on the bone. So this structure here, if we go back to this slide, this structure here, the sagittal crest, is basically the attachment point for that muscle. So the reason why they have the flared zygomatics, the dish face, the postorbital constriction, and the sagittal crest are all accommodations for having large, powerful chewing muscles. So all of these anatomical changes, all of these alterations in the skull and the cranial features are related to having large chewing muscles. So the question here on the slide was the unique cranial anatomy of the robust australopith's adaptation for hard object feeding. So basically there is a hypothesis that the reason these anatomical changes occurred is because these robust australopiths were eating something different than their earlier ancestors. They kind of switched to a different ecological niche and started consuming a different type of food that would have been harder to chew up and harder to process. Okay, so that is an introduction to why these robust australopiths look different than they do. The rest of the slide set you'll want to go through. There are three specific, there are three species of robust australopiths that are described on the slides. Two of them lived in East Africa and one of them lived in South Africa. You can find information about their anatomy later in the slide set. Make sure that you go through that information and the information at the end of chapter 10 in your textbook. You'll be kind of up to speed on where we need to be prior to going into the rise of the genus Homo.